stage, Axios political reporter Hans Nichols.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us. My name is Hans Nichols. I'm a political reporter here at Axios. I write a nightly newsletter called Hill Leaders. You can sign up for it at axios.com. It should land in your inbox at 8 p.m. every night. Sometimes that slides, but we're trying to keep that 8 p.m. deadline. I'd like to welcome up our first guest. We have a lot of great guests, but our first guest, because I'm interviewing, is our greatest. No. Senator Elissa Slotkin, soon to be the senior senator. Please come up. Great to see you. I'd like to start off with something that's in the news but not getting that much attention, but sometimes on the periphery it is, and that is Venezuela and the president's strike on a suspected drug-carrying boat.
Yeah.
You've served in senior positions at the Defense Department when I first got to know you, although it's unclear if we knew each other as undergraduates, but we don't really delve into that. You've served in senior positions at Defense, CIA. Tell me what you think of this as a CIA analyst, as a Defense Department. Is this a strike that should require congressional authorization? And have you been briefed, and should Congress be briefed on it?
Right. Yeah, I think, look, when I was at the Pentagon, we had standard operating procedures for how to deal with this kind of thing. That doesn't mean we were as aggressive as maybe we should have been, but there are ways that you engage these ships, that you can even disable these ships, right? Shoot out their motors, board them. The Coast Guard, this is what they do for a living. Hitting them without those standard operating procedures, I definitely have concerns about. And at a minimum, we should be talking about it actively as a member of the Armed Services Committee, or maybe the Intel Committee, whatever certainly Armed Services plus the Intel Committee, I think makes sense. But I don't, right now, the leadership on the Hill, the people who are chairing all these committees, are not looking to have a hearing unless Donald Trump is okay with that hearing. So we are not discussing it. At a minimum, we should get a briefing. But that is something we are actively discussing with the leadership of the committees. So
that's to say that you think Republicans in the Senate are abrogating their duties to do congressional oversight on military strikes?
Well, certainly on these military strikes, but for me, the much bigger elephant in the room is the fact that we have uniformed military, National Guard, and active duty in American streets, and we haven't had a hearing about that. And for the long-term sort of relationship between the American people and the uniformed military, that to me is a bare minimum. So that to me is the big one to have that we are not having. Venezuela also very important, particularly when there's bellicose language from the administration about doing more and threats. But I think I put it into the category of my colleagues literally laying down and ceding their responsibilities as an equal branch of government.
What can you do in your current role to change that? I mean, you're here talking to me about it, but is there anything you can do to force hearings or force more information? I mean, some of your colleagues, we've seen with Senator Shaheen, has been pretty crafty about putting holds on certain noms. What can you do?
I mean, I think there's banging pots and pans, both in public but also in private. Our ranking members usually have relationships with the chairman that go back years and years and years, and so relying on those relationships, like trying to ease them. And then what ends up happening is any other hearing that we have, for instance, on a confirmation of a nominee, turns into a proxy hearing about the big issue of the day. So about the National Guard and uniform and active duty in our streets, or about Venezuela. And we have confirmation hearings this week. I'm sure that's exactly what will happen.
An opportunity to really hold them.
If you're not going to let us have a hearing about, in the United States of America, having uniformed military on our streets in a way that is absolutely contradictory to our history, then I don't know what we're doing in these committees, and we're going to find any way we can to raise those issues on behalf of our constituents.
I'm glad you mentioned constituents, because you've just done this big listening tour in your home state of Michigan, and you talked about this in your Council on Foreign Relations speech, the trust deficit. It seems to be almost apolitical, nonpartisan, this trust deficit. There's anger at both parties on the way global affairs, foreign affairs has been conducted over the last 20 years. How does Congress, how does the country, how do policymakers win that trust back?
Well, first of all, just to be clear, I decided to give a national security speech, and so I did something that I would have really not even thought to do 15 years ago when I was at the Pentagon. And I said, let's have town halls on what Michiganders want out of national security. What do they expect out of their government? What do they think of when they think of foreign policy? And I did events in Benton Harbor and Troy, Michigan. And it was extremely interesting because, number one, there is still a desire for American leadership in the world. It wasn't like, forget it, I'm an isolationist, I never want to do anything abroad. They want to be the leaders because they know, especially in a state like Michigan, that if we're not leading, no matter our faults, it's going to be China leading or Russia leading, and they'd rather have us than anybody. But, the middle of the country is also who fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? They're the ones who watched us in these forever wars, and whether they were left-wing people or right-wing people or wherever they were, they felt like we had not succeeded in these endeavors that we did. And in the meantime, their lives have gotten harder. Their middle-class lives have gotten harder to sustain. So there was this real feeling like it can't be words, it can't be a speech that's going to bring and bridge that trust deficit. It's about how we engage abroad and earning back some of that trust. And I think for me, talking with them, I realized, with all the ways defense and national security are changing, the way that technology, right, is going to absolutely fundamentally shift how we think about defending the homeland. We are not doing, because we're such a mess here in Washington, we're not focusing on the truly strategic issues around national security, which I believe to be economic security, tech security, and making sure we understand that right now our citizens are on the front lines of this fight.
You mentioned tech. I think a lot of times when we hear tech, we think cyber.
Yeah,
and
cyber,
you have, and beyond that, but you've talked about the idea of a cyber national guard.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Does that mean I'm a really smart programmer at Google or Microsoft or somewhere, and then once a month I go and serve in a cyber force?
So first of all, just to make sure we understand, when the volume of cyber attacks that are going on against our citizens every single day is insane, right? If those were little bombs going off across the country, we'd be in like full-scale mobilization at this point. So, for instance, when I was a congresswoman last year, every single K through 12 school had been ransomed. Some had paid, some had not for their kids' data. Every single hospital had been ransomed. Some had paid, some had not. We know through the stuff that we all read here in Washington about the Chinese, the way that they've gotten into our telecoms, into our infrastructure. And to me, we're just kind of like leaving our citizens without any tools. Some of them will call, right? That superintendent of your kid's K through 12 school will call up the Michigan State Police or the FBI and say, they took our data and now I'm having to pay in cryptocurrency, some weird, thing, can you help me? And the FBI will be very honest and they'll say, unless it's a really huge sum of money or we catch it so quickly, there's really no capacity with what the staffing they have right now to go after these threats. So they're just like being attacked and nothing's happening. And for me, having a cyber national guard that can be brought in when there's truly a big sort of infrastructure attack, when there's been something significant that's happened that can help in that moment. Our schools and our hospitals don't know exactly what to do. That to me is at least an interesting option to consider.
Are our schools and hospitals paying these ransoms?
Some of them, yes. It depends. If you're a school and you haven't made an accurate copy of all the kids' data, and you're out in like Pinckney, Michigan, and you're not trained on cybersecurity, you haven't gone through all that work. You're just trying to teach kids, and then someone takes your only copy of everyone's data, everything about that child, their learning issues, all of that stuff. Some schools make the decision to pay.
You've also talked about new alliances, a lithium alliance, a chips alliance. What do those alliances look like? Are they NATO light? Are they stronger than NATO? Is it just a trade alliance?
Yeah, I think part of looking forward on national security is sort of being open-minded and creative on what we mean by alliances. And for me, especially coming from Michigan, supply chains, our supply chains are part of our national security apparatus. We must secure access to certain critical items. We're not going to be able to produce, nor should we, produce every single chip that we're ever going to make, or we don't have all the rare earth minerals that we're going to need. But we can form alliances that have common rules, common export control procedures, common trade rules, and then an ability to sort of blunt against Chinese coercion. That's what we're seeing right now, is like China is picking off small countries, let's say one of the Baltic states, and being like, we're gonna withhold your supply so that you, small Baltic state, are gonna be in trouble. That to me is a real vulnerability. So creating some rules of the road, I would call it Article 5 light. I don't know that we're going to war, but we are certainly gonna take common action.
But Article 5 implies not necessarily military action if there's attack against one, it's attack against all, but it requires a response. So is that going to be a military response or an economic response if, say, Latvia is coerced?
No, I think first and foremost, certainly it's an economic response. It's a diplomatic response. I will say where I am very open to, and we should all be thinking about new doctrine and a new approach for these threats of the future. If Russia and a group from Russia conducts a cyber attack in Michigan in the middle of winter and 180 elderly people freeze to death in their homes, what's the proper proportional response? What do we do as Americans to respond to that attack? Right now, the answer is mostly nothing. We have cyber tools, we have offensive tools. We don't have great doctrine on how to use it. In our system, we don't typically go after elderly Russian citizens in their homes. That's not our typical way of handling things as a modern military. But what do you do when they kill your citizens? It's an honest-to-God question of how, in the future, we use these new tools. And I would offer that if you conduct a cyber attack on our infrastructure that has the same death toll and destruction that a kinetic attack would typically have, you should be willing to consider that, potentially, depending on how big it is, an act of war and respond militarily. And that's what we're not able to do right now. We're not able to say that if we had a cyber 9/11, right, and the entire eastern seaboard goes out of power and people in hospitals pass away and all those things, we don't have doctrine for a proportional military response.
And so you want that clarity also to act as a deterrent to send.
We have zero deterrence on cyber attacks. Right now, the United States of America, we have deterrence on military attacks. Most countries of the world do not want to tangle with us. But a cyber attack on our infrastructure so that China's in our entire telecom system? I mean, I was part of the hack of OPM that took all the data from government workers, right? All my personal data, all the forms that I turned in to get my security clearance. And it's like, oh, they have everyone's data. We have zero deterrence on it, and we need to reestablish deterrence.
When we're talking about chips, everyone here is probably aware at this point that 60% of the world chips, 90% of the high-tech chips come from Taiwan. You visited Taiwan as a member of Congress. You're intimately familiar with it. I always like to ask this question because I never get the same answer from senior officials like yourself. What's your best estimate on the Elissa Slotkin calendar on when China might cross the strait?
So look, I don't think anyone knows for sure that China has made an affirmative decision. I don't think it's a secret that while we were busy fighting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, China was busy investing in technology meant specifically to undercut our military advantages. And while we were building Humvees and JLTVs and important things for Iraq and Afghanistan, they were saying, we're not going to go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with the United States, tank on tank. We want to undercut them, particularly in things like space and cyber, so that America could go blind, deaf, and dumb in the first moments of a conflict. They invested in that. They were ahead of us on that. I think that means this next couple of years, 3 to 7 years, are a period of real vulnerability. It's just like a normal competition. They invested, they got ahead of us. This is why I was one of the few Democrats who supported the standing up of Space Force, right? It's just, separate from the Star Trek-y kind of part of it, they are eating our lunch in space. And that's a problem for everyone who's sitting here looking at your phone, right? So I think for me, I don't have anything more specific that in the next 6-7 years, we have a continued period of vulnerability that we need to watch very closely.
So it doesn't, you said 3 to 7 and 6 to 7. When does the window open when the risk is very acute that China crosses the strait?
I just, look, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, we get classified briefings. And you have what you have. For me, I'm not going to sit here and expose American vulnerabilities and classified information, in public.
Can we just do a quick one on the digital dollar and China, and walk us through how dollar dominance is an important national security issue, it's important to global security and the international financial system. What does the U.S. need to do to counter China in the digital cryptocurrency space?
Yeah, I think the bigger point is that America, we basically built the global financial system or rebuilt it after World War II, and it's based on the dollar. And every single person here watching benefits from the fact that we built that system in our image. It helps us with our mortgage rates. It helps us with our 401ks. It is incredibly important that the dollar remain the global financial currency of the future, not just the present. And if we haven't noticed, certain countries and industries are just skipping traditional banking and going right into crypto. This is why cryptocurrency is a very important issue, even though it gives some people the heebie-jeebies, right? So
do you own any crypto?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. And I'm also like the author of the no stock trading bill, so I do very little outside of my important salary from the U.S. Senate. But I think for me, I want to make sure that it's our currency that's the backbone as we transition across the world to digital currencies. So we talked about the country of Kenya, right? They've skipped over banking, right? You wanna ride a matatu or a bus in Kenya, you pay with crypto. What is that keyed to? Is it keyed to the dollar? It's important that it's keyed to the dollar. If we enjoy sanctions as a tool of diplomacy, that involves us having control of that currency. The Chinese are very interested in the currencies of the future being tied to their currency. And so for me, this is part of how we maintain our leadership role in the world. That means we need to do things like put left and right limits around the crypto world, and I voted on the Genius Act, but also issue a digital dollar, which is something that the Chinese did back in 2020. They issued a digital version of their currency. It just, to me, if we want to be in the game, we have to at least start this conversation. If the speed of commerce is now digital, and we need to issue our own digital currency.
Senator, the speed of this conversation flew by. We're 3 minutes over. That's all we have time for, but I'd like to thank you for your time and welcome up our next guest. Thanks again.
Thanks, Hans.